I would like to start with a quote. We have a single mission to protect and hand over the planet to the next generation. Good morning to one and all. I very warmly welcome each and every one of you to this fourth episode of the webinar series by Central Nodal Agency for Sustainable Tourism. I'm Karthika Bharati Krishnan, Assistant Tourism Manager for Madhya Pradesh, will be the moderator for today's webinar on decarbonizing tourism strategies and measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the industry. Let us start our webinar with greetings to our eminent speakers of the day, Mr. Santosh Kumar, Country Head of Indian Subcontinent, Indonesia, Sri Lanka and Maldives from Booking.com. Mr. Jaideep Bansal, CEO of Global Himalayan Expedition, Mr. Anubhav Jain, also from Global Himalayan Expedition, and all our responsible travelers as attendees in the webinar. All around the world, climate changes are becoming more evident, causing flooding and extreme temperatures in different nations. Weather patterns have become unpredictable, and all this is detrimental to the tourism industry due to its dependency on natural resources as attractions. Decarbonizing tourism is one of the significant challenges our industry faces. Hence, to bring a paradigm shift in how tourism is developed, the Ministry of Tourism, Government of India, has developed a national strategy for sustainable tourism with 7 strategic pillars in continuation with relevant ministries, state governments, and industry stakeholders. The strategy aims to integrate sustainability in the Indian tourism sector and make it resilient, low carbon intensive while preserving natural and cultural resources. Additionally, during the third tourism working group at G20 in Srinagar, the Ministry of Tourism also launched the Travel for Life sectoral program under Life Mission aiming to green the tourism industry. With this context, today's esteemed experts will be discussing strategies and measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our industry. Let me explain the structure of the webinar, which is divided into 2 parts. The first part will focus on the keynotes of our speakers, and the second one will go with question and answer session. Without any further delay, let me welcome our first speaker, Shri Santosh Kumar, the country head from Booking Head. He works with vendors to strengthen and help them achieve their carbon reduction goals. Booking.com became carbon neutral in 2020 by transitioning its global operations to renewable electricity. They aim to achieve this by making their data centers and offices as efficient as possible and by supporting those they work with. They have also developed a climate awareness program for their employees. We're glad to have you here, sir, and the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Karthika, for that wonderful introduction. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here on this Saturday morning with speaking with you all about a topic that's very close to my heart. Before I begin, Karthika, just a quick logistics check. How many minutes do I have for this opening statement?
Sir, you can have 4 to 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, great. And I'm going to take the cue from you, right? I'll also start with a quote. I think it was Barack Obama who said, we are probably the first generation to really experience the effects of climate change and probably the last that can actually do something about it. So I think, what we're talking about today is a very, very timely thing, and it's something that's important for all of us here on this planet. I think, when I speak about what we're doing at Booking.com and how we are talking about how we are addressing this important topic of sustainability, for us, our sustainability responsible tourism strategy is built around 3 pillars. The first pillar is really what are we doing as an organization, right? What are we doing to take accountability in this aspect? And our underlying premise is that we can only hold others to a particular standard if we are able to match up to it ourselves. Okay, so therefore, in that regard, as an organization, we are undertaking several things. Number one is, for the last 2 years, we've put out a climate action plan, which we refresh every year annually. This is aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, and we expect to be net zero in the coming decades in terms of our own operations globally. We have undertaken actually, quite a few significant efforts in this particular regard. For instance, we are looking at internally within Booking.com. We have employee volunteer programs. We have waste streaming systems that are implemented in 70% of our offices, and we plan to have systems also in the remaining 30% in the coming years. We have committed to removing single serving packaging from all our offices globally. And as Kartika was saying earlier, we will introduce climate awareness training now for all our employees globally. And in addition to that, we are highly encouraging our employees when we travel to book sustainable properties, follow sustainable practices, etc., wherever possible. That's what we're doing internally. Now, coming to the industry, we believe that we are still at the beginning of this particular journey. So to that effect, what we did was, we introduced something called as a sustainable travel program. This was roughly about 18 months ago. And, since then, in the sustainable travel program, we've got about roughly 500,000 properties globally onboarded in this particular program. We also includes 20,000 properties just in India. Essentially, what we do is the program is designed for accommodations globally. It's a credible sustainability measure that provides information to travelers all over the world looking to make more sustainable travel choices. And it's designed to recognize the sustainability efforts of all types of properties, whether it is a homestay in Alleppey or a five-star hotel in, let's say, in Chanakyapuri in Delhi. And the journey to become more sustainable is essentially, it's not a simple one, right? And we recognize that all our accommodation partners are all on unique journeys to be able to get to this end goal. And we want to recognize our partners' ambitions to become more sustainable, whether it's changes like eliminating single-use plastic or switching to LED lights, or to more complex initiatives like waste and water management. We recognize 29 impactful practices across 5 categories: energy and greenhouse gas reduction, waste management, water consumption, protecting nature, and supporting local communities. And our partners simply indicate their actions taken, and we assign them a badge based on that particular input. Recently, we have actually enhanced that particular program. Now we have the grading across levels from level 1 to 3. And we are also integrating more and more third-party certification, therefore making sustainable travel information even more transparent to travelers who are looking for such properties. So that's what we're doing for the industry. We're also educating a lot of partners. I'm happy to tell you a little more about that later in the webinar. The third pillar is what we do is we're looking at collaboration with the industry, right? Because we believe that this cannot be done in silos. The challenge that we are all facing is a very, very big one, and all stakeholders across, public and private sector need to come together. Whether it's governments, travel associations, travel platforms, hospitality companies, NGOs, and travelers themselves. So therefore here, a couple of examples I can give you. One is we've entered into a coalition called the Travelist Coalition, which is, sponsored also by Prince Harry, where there are several large big tech companies that are part of this coalition, where we are looking to form a sort of a standardized approach or a framework towards sustainability. The other thing that we are doing is we are also, like I said before, we are integrating more and more into other third-party sustainability programs. Right. We also recently, just in fact 2 weeks ago, released our annual sustainability report because we believe that it's very important for us to give back through our research that we're doing. We want to be able to share that back with the industry. And so as part of that research, we surveyed roughly 35,000 travelers all over the world, including in India. And that research now is available, broadly speaking, for anybody to be able to access it. So this particular research, the core part of this research is talking about how more and more travelers now want sustainable options, but it's a challenge for them to find them. Right. So as a business, we are trying to see how we can address this particular goal. And the last bit I will say in terms of what we're doing in terms of collaboration is we're working more and more with government. So, for instance, one example I can take is Kerala tourism, where we've been conducting a lot of workshops, training programs across the state of Kerala, especially in the homestay segment, in the alternate accommodation segment, where we are educating micro entrepreneurs in terms of how can they become more sustainable in their operations, but also access travelers coming through online channels and thus improving the guest experience. So that's something that we're looking to do more and more across India with other state governments as well. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a background into what we're doing as a company.
Certainly, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for aligning everything wonderfully. Over to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Shri Jaideep Bansal. He is the CEO of GHG Impact Ventures, also known as Global Himalayan Expedition, an award-winning social enterprise that works to bring sustainable development to the remotest communities of India. Winner of the 2020 UN Climate Action Award, GHG's work of remote rural electrification has been documented by National Geography, BBC, and NDTV to reach out to a worldwide audience. It has been internationally recognized and awarded by the WTTC and the World Tourism Awards. Mr. Bansal is a young global leader, class of 2022, and has served as the foundation board member of the Global Shapers Community, which is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. Let's hear more about the same from him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Kartika, and a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are logging in from. It's a fascinating day to talk about sustainable tourism and decarbonizing the tourism industry, because as we see, I'm not sure if all of you have heard this, but recently France put a ban on destinations that can be accessed within 2.5 hours. So all flights are banned and they're encouraging train travel. And that is a great way to sort of talk about the decarbonization journey that we are on within the tourism industry, because frankly, if you recall, Ministry of Tourism had a great webinar series called Dekho Apna Desh. And the whole idea was to promote that how can we visit the rich, beautiful cultural heritage that our India has to offer. And then I see in the audience also, there are people who have joined in from Madhya Pradesh, Nagaland, Karnataka, Kerala. So everyone wants to be part of the tourism value chain. But then at the same time, you start wondering that how do I balance exploring versus my carbon footprint? And that's a huge question that all of us sort of continue to struggle with. The ones who are more responsible sort of think about more wiser ways on how you can do it. Not taking flights or flight shaming is not something I would encourage. So that's more of an activist response to the decarbonization problem. I think there has to be a more proactive solution, like what Santosh also talked about, where we have to really understand what the traveler wants and can we offer those sustainable tourism choices to the travelers. But before anything, I think it's very important to take a step back and understand what does decarbonizing the tourism industry really means. And for that, it's very important before you take any step is to measure. Unless and until we don't measure what's the carbon footprint of a hotel, what's the carbon footprint of a resort, we don't have any data around this. There are bits and pieces here and there, but then can we come up with the standard, work with the Ministry of Tourism and come up with the standard that if any hotel has XYZ emissions, this is what their carbon footprint looks like. And then of course, break it down into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, because scope 1 and scope 2 are clearly in your boundary of control. If I'm a hotel or a resort owner, I can clearly say that, okay, from now on, all the energy that I have, if it's a resort in, let's say, in a desert place or, any other area, if I'm using diesel generators to power my resort, then that's a huge carbon footprint that I have, which I can immediately mitigate by putting in clean energy, solar power. And so those are the kind of easy choices that a lot of the tourism providers can do, which is defining the boundary that they have within scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse emissions and controlling that. Then comes the scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which are the services that you're taking, which also will take a lot of time to sort of really understand how do you decarbonize the scope 3 emissions. But scope 1, scope 2, which are in your scope, can be easily done. For example, if you're a hotel, and you see this, a lot of hotels are now moving towards this, why not have your own greenhouse where all the microgreens can be taken from those greenhouses within the hotel premises? Because hotels and resorts typically have big gardens that they can use for these. So there are smarter choices that you can make. What we at GHG are doing is really taking this whole narrative of carbon neutral tourism and applying it to the rural setting, because we feel that it's not just these villages, the cities of India that are going to become smarter and carbon neutral, but the easier low-hanging fruit is the villages of India, the rural India, where there's a lot of rich cultural heritage for it to be explored. But then it can also enable through the setup of homestays, and by creating avenues where travelers can leave behind a minimal carbon footprint of their visit to these destinations. And of course, Anubhav will talk more about it, but just to give you a glimpse, imagine you walk into a rural village where the homestay is powered with solar energy, has solar water heaters for providing you hot water. There is zero plastic waste. The water is being recycled through filters, and there is organic dry toilets. Then as a traveler, and then you also have for the food that is coming from the greenhouse that the homestay has. So imagine there is no carbon footprint. The only footprint that you have is reaching the destination and going back. Otherwise, when you are at that destination, when you are at that place, there is zero carbon emissions that you are giving to the environment. And that is how we need to think about this. It is not about discouraging people to travel. We need to encourage people to travel. And also we need to get the notion out of everyone's head that traveling sustainably is expensive. I know Booking.com has done a survey around this, right? Santosh, where you went out and asked people that, would you like to travel sustainably? Everyone says yes. But then the moment they say, what is the biggest barrier? The immediate question comes is the cost. So I think that notion has also to be dispelled, because sustainability is not expensive. Sustainability is much wiser. It's more practical, and it's the choice that we need to make going forward. And it's about making those choices available online. For example, what platforms like Booking and others are doing is putting those choices clearly in front of the consumer, that when you are booking a property, is that a sustainable property? Are they sort of working on their sustainable parameters? And as a traveler, can you make those choices when you visit any destination? So I think those are the things that we really need to understand. So again, to sort of just step back, it's first about measure. Unless and until you don't measure, you can't do anything about it. We can keep saying, let's decarbonize, but what to decarbonize? Unless and until I don't measure, then that's where the action would happen. So I need to understand, what am I looking at? What am I decarbonizing? And then I can take actions on it. And there are, of course, with our work with the Ministry of Tourism, for example, with the Vibrant Village program, this is exactly what we are doing. We have created a destination development map. So for example, if you have to rehabilitate the vibrant villages, if you have to really bring tourism, how does that tourism look right the first time? What does it take? So instead of just going out and creating mass tourism opportunities or building hotels and resorts, what does it look like for a destination to be completely carbon neutral, which is in line with the Prime Minister's vision of creating a carbon neutral whether it's the Himalayas or the Northeast, right? So what does it look like? What are the amenities you need to provide? So there's a proper blueprint that has been devised in partnership with the ministry, where it talks about, not just phone connectivity and roads, but clean energy, zero plastic waste, zero waste generation. And so those are the things which are possible. Indian rural communities have been practicing the most sustainable ways of living for generations and generations. It is the sort of there's hardly any plastic that you'll see being used in the villages. But then when the tourist comes, they think, oh, we need to give them a bottled filtered, we need to give them a mineral water bottle. And you also have the tendency to ask, forget villages. Even if you go in hotels now, there is still bottled water, plastic water bottles being given. So I think there are many smarter choices that we can make together as a generation that can shift our needle towards being more sustainable. And I think the way to look at this is, if there are 8 billion people on this planet, it's not about, a handful of governments or a handful of ministers or a handful of companies that will do it. It is collective action. And what Santosh rightly put, that, in crisis, climate change is a crisis right now. There can only be collaboration. There is no competition. And that is where, it's about working together. We have worked with Booking.com also in setting up several of these carbon neutral homestays across India. So it's about really working within the public sector, private sector, leveraging the financing, putting the money where it belongs, and sort of really accelerating the pathway towards a carbon neutral future, both in terms of tourism, but also for these future generations of our planet.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking us on an imagination tour to a neutral carbon rural tourism village. Here, I would also like to tell you that Ministry of Tourism is also hosting a best tourism village competition, which is in the second stage, and we are very keenly looking into the points of sustainability to award the villages. So, thank you for your insights, sir. Now, I would like to invite Shri Anubhav Jain, who is a senior manager at GHG Impact Ventures and also drives the Mountain Homestays program. An initiative of GHG brings livelihood opportunities to remote mountain communities through setting up of eco-friendly homestays. Mountain Homestays has successfully developed over 85 homestays in remote villages of Ladakh and is building a replicable model to empower the communities across the world through creation of a carbon neutral rural tourism model. Please share your words of wisdom with us, sir.
Thank you, Kartika. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everybody from wherever they've joined. And thank you, Jaideep and Santosh, for taking us on a journey of carbon neutral destinations and homestays. So here sitting in Ladakh, this area has been facing the largest brunt of what climate change is all about. It has been raining for past 3 days, and we are seeing that the passes were closed, the tourism could not come in, and even the basic supplies was a big problem to kind of come in this location because of the climate change and the glacial melting. So that is a real impact which we are seeing in terms of climate change. And that's where decarbonizing becomes a very, very integral tool of, making sure that we take an action towards climate, and we really, really make sure that we adopt carbon neutral practices. And that's where GHG has developed in line with the vision of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Of course, Jaideep has put some, light on what we have developed inside these homestays. So within these homestays, which we have established in Ladakh, over 25 of these homestays have solar powered houses. So each of the homestay has a solar panel and a battery and an inverter for itself. And the entire power when a tourist is coming and staying in this homestay comes from that solar energy. We also have reusable amenities in these homestays, which so typically one would come in a location and you use your plastic again and again, like plastic bottles and so on and so forth, or maybe a toothbrush they would use and throw. So this actually adds to the carbon emissions and the waste in that destination, which is not the right thing. So that's why we have installed reusable amenities. And Ladakh typically has abundant sunshine. Right now, before installing solar water heaters, they were using firewood to kind of feed into hot water requirements for a tourist. So that's where we've gotten solar water heaters to kind of capitalize and use the solar power to give hot water to tourists as well as the homeowners, and kind of reduce the carbon emissions, which were done while staying in these homestays using firewood. Typically, we also saw, since Ladakh traditionally did not have a lot of vegetation due to the cold environment, we also saw that several people had to travel miles or kilometers away to be able to get their food supplies, which was adding to the carbon emissions via car, truck, or whatever mode of transport they used. And that's where we introduced the concept of greenhouses within these homestays where they could grow their own vegetation. So a tourist gets great farm-to-table food, which is organic. And the other thing is it reduces the carbon emission happening inside these homestays. And also, typically in Ladakh, you would have stream waters, which of course a tourist will not be able to consume directly. And you would have to boil it before providing it to the tourist. So that's why we have introduced the water filters, which kind of reduce the need for boiling water and giving it to tourists. So that is how we are reducing the carbon emissions within the homestays. So typically, if you say that if a homestay emits 5 tons of carbon, by introducing these elements, we've reduced it to 140 kgs of carbon emissions. That's a significant, offset in or removal of carbon from the environment in terms of these homestays. And since these communities have been facing the largest brunt of what is happening in terms of the climate change, that is where the action should start in these rural areas in the first place. As Jaideep correctly said, that the cities have been long emitting carbon, and it becomes difficult for them to introduce these measures. In rural homestays, it's fairly comfortable and easier to implement these solutions and reduce the carbon. So what we've also done is that all of these homestays have actually measurable impact. So we are developing a mechanism where you can actually measure the amount of energy you've consumed, the amount of water you have used inside a homestay. And also, when you're staying in a destination, what is the amount of income you're generating in that destination, and all such things which are doing in these destinations. So we've introduced a live monitoring tool which is in development, and soon you will have a certificate. Once you check out of the homestay, a traveler will exactly know that how much energy, water he has consumed, and what kind of impact he's made in the environment. So that gives a very good feel-good factor to a traveler that, okay, this is what I've done. What becomes integral in this whole scheme of things is, for a traveler, all carbon neutrality, reducing carbon, all such things do not make a lot of sense immediately, though they want to do it, but they don't want to pay for it, as Jaideep correctly said. And it becomes integral that you create that infrastructure within the homestay, which is conveniently used by a traveler. And he doesn't have to think about it. Okay, I don't need to use plastic. So you remove plastic in the first place, provide him an alternative amenity, which I feel is a big problem across accommodations, that you may not get filtered water. Today, if you're traveling to a destination, finding filtered water is a big problem. You have to carry a bottle, and you carry a bottle, but you don't find place to fill water. That's becoming a big problem. So that's where we've introduced these concepts within the homestay, so that it becomes convenient for a traveler. He doesn't have to think twice. And at the end of the day, he gets a very good feel-good factor through a certificate that, okay, I've already done this impact. So he wanted something, he got it at an affordable price. And at the end of the day, he saw the real result of what is happening inside these. These homestays are located across beautiful locations in Ladakh. You go to Siachen, you go to Pangong Lake. So we've hosted over 600 travelers last year at a homestay in Pangong, which is built around the same concept of carbon neutral homestays. So, that is the kind of thing. And these homestays are available all across Booking.com, Airbnb, Make My Trip. And as Santosh correctly said, it's stage 3 property, which we have reached. So, that's the concept of homestays which we would like to replicate across. Yes.
Very wonderfully said, sir. And the numbers you have brought down in carbon emission, that is wonderful. And we would all like to visit Ladakh and all the homestays which you have been working on. Thank you, sir. So by this, we are closing the part 1 of this session and are opening up for the panel discussion. I'd like to mention that YouTube listeners may ask their questions in the chat box, and Zoom participants may raise their hands virtually to put forward their questions. Thanks to all our speakers, and now let us move into the question and answer session. And my first question will be to Mr. Santosh Kumar. Sir, what do you think are the real life challenges faced by industries in India when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And how are the factors such as limited access to clean technologies, cost implications, and the need for economic growth pose obstacles in implementing these reduction measures?
Yeah, good question, Kartika. So before I talk about the barriers, right, I'll set the context a little bit. When we think about it globally, travel industry today contributes roughly about 8 to 9%, right, of the total carbon emissions that are there. And within that, obviously, you have airline sector, which contributes probably the largest aspect, and then followed by accommodation, right, and then other parts of the industry. To give you a sort of a context to the challenge in front of us, right? We recently did a study with EY as well as another consulting company called OC&C, where we looked at what will it take for the accommodation sector to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. What we found was that globally, the accommodation invest roughly about 770 billion euros over the next 2 decades if we have to become completely, carbon neutral, right? Now, that's not a small number by any stretch of the imagination, right? And to break that up a little bit, 243 billion euros of that are going to go into greenhouse gas abatement measures. And the remaining, which is 525 billion, is going to go into greening the energy supply for the remaining emissions, right? Now, this is also globally today, when we look at the annual revenues that are coming out of the accommodation sector, it's roughly the same, okay, which is roughly about 700 to 800 billion euros. So that's the amount of investment that the sector has to make overall, right? The good news is that there is significant potential for emission reductions that are profitable for accommodations eventually. But we find that there are essentially three key barriers, right, to implementation. The most important barrier is that there is a lack of urgency. Okay, for a majority of the abatement measures, accommodations do not feel the need to take urgent action today. Okay, because and when we think about it, the primary purpose of a business, it has changed in recent times, but primary purpose of a business is to make profits, right? But if you think about it today, businesses are taking more of a view towards people, planet, and profits, right? But having said that, there is still a lack of urgency. Many accommodations are still driven primarily to create a positive guest experience and improve their profitability. And decarbonization measures are usually implemented with these objectives in mind. But showing how investments improve their operational efficiency and how inaction will ultimately be more costly due to higher energy costs are important levers using which we can drive their ambition and unlock additional efforts, right? Because the opportunity cost is very big. So number one is the lack of urgency. Number two is knowledge gaps. Right? Knowledge gaps and lack of access to relevant information is also a very important barrier. A large group of accommodations today are quite ready, in terms of being more ambitious and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They have already implemented many measures, but are lacking relevant information to enable them to implement even more. And this includes, and I think goes back to the point that Jaideep was making earlier. This includes a lack of data about the sustainability impact of specific measures, the financial implications, and practical considerations, right? Like, for example, what is the impact on guest experience during the implementation, right? So therefore, providing accommodations with a tailored information and support can help us unlock this potential, right? But it again goes back to what is a common framework that we can use, right? Because accommodation sector is not straightforward. Globally, airlines, when you think about it, there are 300, maybe 400 airlines today, right? And a plane is a plane, right? The structure of a plane does not really vary so much, right? And sustainability measures are therefore a little more easier, or let's say more structured in the aviation space, whereas in the accommodation space, they can be significantly more complex because we're dealing with millions of properties, right, all over the world, and each property has its own set of impact and scope, and how they're built and how they're managed. So therefore it's a little harder to do it in the accommodation space. The third barrier is lack of financial means, right? And this is a big one, right? Especially for emerging countries, emerging destinations, especially when we go into tier 2, tier 3 markets. Lack of financial resources or access to capital hinder progress quite significantly. So therefore, while many emission reduction measures are generally profitable over a 15-year investment horizon, they might require significant upfront investment, right? So those homestays that Anubhav was talking about, do they have the capital? Do they have the wherewithal to be able to invest over a 15-year investment horizon period, right? So some measures also are not profitable at all, and thus they might require a larger commitment, by the accommodations, right? So therefore, also a lot of accommodations, what they've indicated are that subsidies are more important than loans, right? So in this regard, the broader ecosystem will play a very, very important role, right? Like how can government step in, in this regard? How can big organizations like us, how can we step in, right? How can the large hospitality chains step in, right? How can the NGOs step in? So therefore, it requires a lot of collaboration in order to be able to solve this last barrier on financial resources.
Thank you, sir, for making us understand it is all about collaboration and not competition. Thank you for that. And my question to Mr. Jaideep Bansal is, so you've been telling us many practical thoughts about the sustainability. So what would be your advice to all the tour operators of India, what they can do to make carbon neutral holidays? Is it easy for a mass tour operator to also shift to carbon neutrality?
Absolutely. I mean, there is like they say, Nike has a great tagline, right? Just do it. So if you're committed to doing something, then just do it. And there are ways and means that not just companies in India, companies outside India are doing it. For example, you look at Interpret Foundation. Now, what they or Interpret Travel, what they've done is they've looked at their top 60 selling trips of a couple of years, and they have looked at each trip is then bisected, that what are the major carbon emissions of a particular trip, and they have looked at decarbonizing those carbon emissions. For example, if a trip involves, for example, going in a plane in a 1 hour flight or a 2 hour flight, can instead of that, they can take a bit of a boat ride and bit of a train ride, which makes it more scenic, which makes it more slow and immersive. So I think that's where every travel operator now needs to look at destinations as more as slow and immersive travel versus the 4-day Ladakh sightseeing and come back, right? Because I mean, you look at these destinations which are being promoted, and unfortunately, a lot of the big travel operators are sort of promoting these itineraries where 5 days, go to a place, go to all the popular destinations. It's like a package tour, right? Day one, go to 5 places. Day two, go to 5 places. Come back, you have the pictures, you have the memories, but look at the impact you are creating on the destination. I'm sure all of us, if we book these itineraries, and if at the end of the trip, all the garbage that we have given to that place is kept at our doorstep, none of us would book those trips, very frankly, because it has to be more slow, immersive. The travel operators also need to clearly segment what are the major, and what we have seen is not just Interpret, it's G Adventures, it's Contiki, so all the big travel, Patagonia. So everyone is looking at a slow, immersive travel. They are looking at sort of slowing down the pace of overall travel, making it more immersive, making it more sustainable. And even in India, we have so many players who are doing that, who are sort of making concentrated efforts to ensure that whenever you are visiting any destination, you leave behind a positive footprint instead of just plastic waste at the destination at the end of the day. And for example, just also coming back to what Santosh was mentioning, nowadays every state department, every state tourism board is coming up with homestay incentives, right? Homestay schemes. Can, as part of the schemes, they can also merge it with some of the central government schemes around promoting solar energy and create an overall subsidy package for the homestay owners, that going forward, like let's say today is what, 27th May. From 27th May, every homestay that is registered in India has a sustainable footprint. And that can only be achieved if you have the right subsidy mix thrown into the picture. It's not about that a homestay owner cannot buy cutlery or crockery. They can do that. So instead of giving them money to buy cutlery, crockery, or bedding, can the scheme focus more on, okay, you build a house that is made out of sustainable structure, you put up solar panels, you put up some solar water heaters, you put in zero plastic waste. So put in all those amenities, waste recycling. So put in all those amenities which can be subsidized through the state government, through the state tourism boards, and through the central government schemes. And that's where the intelligent minds who are on this webinar, and of course in our states and even in the Ministry of Tourism, really need to put this together as a package by working with different state tourism boards. Unfortunately, what's happening right now is every state tourism board has a different homestay policy. Everyone has a different agenda, and they're right in what they're doing, right? Because they want more people to be brought into the homestay fold. But my point is, if you're doing something, let's do it right the first time. Instead of then after 3 years trying to sort of do the corrections that, oh, we forgot this in the subsidy, we forgot this in the scheme. Now these homestays are no longer sustainable. They have just become hotels. And frankly, nothing against the hotel industry. I mean, hotel industry is great. That's the major tourism driver. And for any hotels, now it's become very easy. You have the LEED certifications. You look at any Taj, ITCs or others, they focus a lot on ensuring that they are the LEED certified hotels, because that's where the true sort of value for them comes in. So it's about getting that certification, getting that tag, and getting that premium for themselves. That's how they're differentiating themselves in the market, right? We were GHG is also in talk with a couple of big hotel chains as to how they can decarbonize. So we are also consulting all these hotels in terms of what does it take. Look at their entire value chain, see what are the always, like I say, if you have a kid and if you want to teach them writing a sentence, it has to start from A, B, C, D. You just can't say, okay, start writing a sentence from today. And what we end up doing is, okay, start writing, start decarbonizing the tourism industry. No, like I said, measure, understand what are the low-hanging fruits, immediately go for those, and then look at the large-scale problem. Otherwise, you can be just overwhelmed. Like Santosh said, it needs a lot of money to decarbonize the whole tourism sector, the accommodation sector, and you and I can just sit here talking about, oh, where will this money come from? That money is not going to come from anywhere. We have to generate it, we have to be smart about it, and we have to ensure that at the end of the day, we are very focused in terms of what is the future that we want at the end of the day. Otherwise, I remember, when COVID hit, the whole tourism industry said, okay, no more business as usual, we'll be more sustainable. As soon as COVID went down, everyone went back to their same way, because, everyone wanted money, everyone wanted revenues. But if we continue to do that, places like Shimla, Kasauli, Darjeeling, you won't be able to go to these places, unfortunately, in the next 5 years, because there'll be nothing left out of these places. So I think it's the right time to act now. Everyone needs to, it has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. Everyone needs to come together and really sort of be focused on what do they want to achieve over the next 10 years out of this whole tourism industry.
Thank you, sir, to make us realize it's not about doing it, it's about doing it right and together. Thank you, sir. And my question to Mr. Anubhav Jain is, so you're already working on this mountain homestay project, and which is falling in the rural areas. But what do you think are the challenges faced by urban areas of India in reducing their carbon footprint? And how possible is it to implement sustainable urban planning, improvise the usage of public transport, and address high energy demands of densely populated cities?
Kartika, so it's a very important question, and I think Santosh and Jaideep have thrown some light on it. The biggest challenge comes as the capital of actually, using the solar panels, getting all these amenities together. That's the biggest challenge which urban cities are facing. And Santosh has kind of put in factors where how hotels have not been able to do it so far. And I think the biggest reason of that is education. I was recently talking to a consultant who is actually working on wastewater management and water reduction. So a small tool of water reduction can actually, which costs about 10 to 12 lakh rupees, can actually be offset in 3 months for a hotel, and it can make hotels running costs lower by reducing the use of water, because the amount of pumping they do and the amount of wastewater management that they have to do, if they use that tool and if they reduce the amount of water used, they can actually save more money. But this education is limited to very few people in the industry. This education has not been widespread. Using a solar panel inside a hotel can actually reduce so if typically a commercial electric meter would cost you 11 to 12 rupees, using solar electricity would cost you cheaper. So, the biggest problem is the initial investment which a hotel has to put in urban cities, or even getting electric mobility. So if I go today and buy an electric car, it would cost you 25 to 30 lakh rupees, and in an internal combustion engine car would typically cost you in a roundabout of 8 to 9 lakh rupees. So the initial capital investment is becoming a big problem in urban cities, especially to be able to implement, execute for hotels and see a long-term impact of that. So, if you typically educate people more that you buy a asset, which is initially costly, we provide you a loan for it, but eventually your operating cost would come down. So, this kind of education becomes a major challenge, which I'm seeing as a big problem, why this is happening. Another thing which is important in urban cities is, let's talk about a destination like Leh, Kasauli, or Shimla. It is about, taking travelers away from Shimla into the catchment areas. And the amount of travelers coming in one destination is huge. So we need to develop more catchment areas around these major cities where travelers can travel, where they can see more areas. So that is tourism dispersal. And that is where we will see, one, tourism having a larger impact over a larger population. And the other thing which we'll see is less, utilization of resources in one destination. So that is how I would see overall the aspect of tourism can be and should be. So, these are the challenges which I see, and this is one of the major solutions which I see. So initial provision of capital to have these amenities, and then eventually the aspect of it. And the other is the mitigation of travel from cities to nearby areas. So typically from Delhi, you can go to Manesar, or further from Manesar up to Nimran, and so on and so on. So, this is what I see as a challenge and a solution to the problem.
Thank you so much for your insights, sir. So we also have questions from YouTube. I'll just read it out, and anybody feel it relevant, you can just come up with your answer, sir. Mr. Wilson Rajan has asked a question. Is there any thought at the policy level to curb over-tourism and put a cap on the number of travelers visiting a destination? This would largely work in favor of reducing the carbon footprints.
I think, there's always this talk, and this is one of the easiest things, right? To curb the number of travelers visiting a destination, or put a destination management at the end of the day that, how many travelers can a destination support? But, when I look at it, right, India as a country, we are now growing on the growth curve. A lot of the Indians who have never traveled before have now got the aspiration, resources, and time to travel. And to imagine, like, if I take my parents to a destination and I suddenly say, there have been hundreds of people who have gone there, but now they're saying, oh, there's a cap right now, we cannot allow you in. How does that make me feel as an Indian, that I cannot visit a destination in the same place where, which I feel that, okay, it's very easy for me to go. So I think putting a cap on the destinations is not such a easy solution. And frankly, nobody will accept it. No travel operator will be willing to let their revenues go down. But I think this has to go hand in hand with what Anubhav mentioned in tourism dispersal. So the same destination, instead of just concentrating all the travelers, which happens right now. For example, again, the classic case of Shimla, right? So everyone wants to go to the Mall Road. Every hotel is there. Every restaurant is there. Why can't you disperse the tourism over a sector of like 10, 20 kilometers so that there is income generation across, the tourism spreads out, and the actual destination, the tourism destination or the picture-seek destination is not just overcrowded. So I think that's where tourism dispersal has to play a great role. And that what it also do is get more people into being able to earn income and livelihood through the tourism value chain. Because currently it's only a handful of, if you look at I think the entire tourism sector in India, it's only a handful of people who are right now earning money from the destination. So you'll have like a very famous, take the classic example of Pangong Lake, right? You had the lake, only the travel operators who had the resources to put up a resort earlier were earning the money. But now, because of the tourism dispersal that has been encouraged through the homestays in the villages on the banks of Pangong Lake, suddenly you have the paradigm has shifted where now the homestay owners are also earning. So, and that has resulted in dispersing travelers across the entire 20-kilometer stretch of the lake, instead of just concentrating it on one small stretch and the entire lake being polluted there and becoming a chapati basically. So I think that's the smarter way to look at it versus saying, okay, we'll allow, of course, a permit-based system has to be there in terms of capping of the number of travelers, where it's a very fragile destination, where we know that, the more travelers they go, they will ultimately, the destination won't cease to exist basically in a few years' time. So that's where the permit system or the capping system needs to happen. In other destinations, it has to be more the dispersal of tourism that has to happen.
Thank you, sir.
I feel like maybe, just to maybe quickly add another point, right?
Yes,
I think
yes, sir, please.
I think overall Jaideep captured it very well, but maybe as Jaideep was talking, I was thinking that there's also a need for better sort of forecasting models for the industry. If we are able to share data across stakeholders, right? Whether it is with the government, whether it is, let's say, aviation companies, hospitality companies, and if we are able to forecast the influx of tourists coming in, etc., into a particular state or a destination, then we are more equipped to deal with larger crowds or larger footprint at a specific time of the year, right? Because definitely there are seasonal trends, right? Because like Shimla, there is a certain time of the year where it's mall road gets really crowded. Well, the mall road gets really crowded, but at other times of the year, it's pretty peaceful. And maybe at certain times of the year, there could be additional measures that are taken, right? That help us be more sort of, rather than being reactive. As a country, we're being more proactive in terms of helping redirect tourist flow, right? There could also be opportunities then for destinations or accommodations to be able to market to tourists in a better way during those high demand periods, right? So therefore, we are able to distribute that, income generation across categories, across destinations in a much more sort of proactive way, so.
And I think just to add on where Santosh is right now, he's in Goa, right? So Goa is a perfect example of this, what they've done. You have the whole North Goa, which is a totally different segment. You have a South Goa, and then the government also came up with a new airport, which is more northern. So now the whole incentive of doing that is to just disperse tourism across the entire beaches versus just concentrating it near the Goa WM airport. So I think that strategy in terms of sort of dispersing tourism, creating the roadways, creating sort of boutique hotel chains across the entire stretch has enabled tourism to be dispersed versus concentrating in just a couple of beaches.
Well said, sir. We have another question. Mr. Amit is asking what action we can take to teach officers, employees working in municipal corporation along with villages, Sarpanch root level for such meaningful educative by sustainable tourism.
I mean, I can answer if anyone wants to.
Anybody.
So I think it's about this only, the whole idea of these webinars, and which have happened a lot. I mean, if you access Ministry of Tourism's directory right now, in terms of the webinars that have been conducted, there is a wealth of information. And it's in local languages, it's in common sort of terminology. So I think anyone who wants to understand more about sustainable tourism at a panchayat level, at a municipal corporation level, there is a wealth of information out there. And I think what you and your team can do, Kartika, is put all those together with regards to themes, whether it's sustainable tourism, cultural tourism, heritage tourism, and sort of then that can be circulated across, because there's a wealth of information. And that was the exact reason why those webinars happened in the first place, that anyone, anywhere can sort of view the webinar, get some information, and then sort of be more practical about what they want to do.
I would like to add on to what Jaideep said about educating Sarpanch and municipal people. So it's also about, what role they're playing in the society. So for example, a Sarpanch has to maybe provide electricity to a village, or if a municipal officer has to look at water management in an area. So, what are the solutions which we are providing them? So for example, if we go to a village and say we go to a Sarpanch and he says that the major problem of my village, it's a tourism village, and a major challenge which I'm facing in a village is water is scarce. So can we give him solutions? Can we have ready solutions for him, which are in first place sustainable, which reduce the amount of water consumption, at the same time solves his problem of water. So for example, in a village, you have 100 liters of water coming, but the consumption is 200 liters. So if we reduce through measures the water consumption to 80 liters, probably he would be saving 20 liters by maybe introducing a efficient flush toilet system, or maybe some other thing. So, these are the kind of solutions which have to go to the grassroots, to these municipal officers, to the Sarpanch. And, that is when they'll be able to implement policies. That is when they'll be able to implement these use cases in these villages. And probably it'll be beneficial for them in terms of creating an impact and showing it in their reports, as well as making sure that a destination overall nurtures well. So I think that is another thing which we can look at.
Thank you, sir. That is very perfectly put on. Information is wealth. Very true. So we have a question. It's actually not a question. She's asking you to discuss on. She's saying carrying capacity of destinations, like you said, about Lake Asauli, Shimla, etc., has to be distributed around nearby places. Homestays must be promoted for small destinations through travel agent social media channels. This is the employment for small town people can also be generated. At the same time, the literacy about sustainable tourism must be introduced through dedicated programs for sustainability. Please discuss on this.
We'll discuss
So,
kya karna hai? She's told everything what we've discussed basically, and she's absolutely spot on. So yeah,
yes.
it sort of sums up what we were discussing basically.
Okay, Ms. Prachi, your point is mentioned, and yes, they have clearly mentioned it. You have kept the points very clear. So I would request the participants in Zoom, if you have any questions, you may please raise your hands virtually so that you can be unmuted for your turn.
Good morning, Kartika. I have a question. I have raised my hand.
Yes, Priya, please do.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to all the panelists here. Few really important, insightful inputs given by you all. Be it the lack of efficient measurement of sustainability, or a sense of developing a sense of collective responsibility amongst people and tourists, or lack of urgency and availability of alternatives. I think these are some very essential points that you've put forth in terms of mainstreaming sustainability in tourism sector. I am a local guide on Google Maps. So I just want to quickly share my screen if the host can enable that. And I just want a question, want to put forth a question to all the two organizations here. Being the leaders in sustainability, will you take a similar step in mainstreaming sustainability in the tourism sector? So there's this aspect of Google Maps where it allows you to sort of measure your impact, where you can measure how much of green travel you have done when you travel. Like I've traveled to around 2 countries, and in the 2 countries that I have traveled to, I have sort of covered 1,711 places. And Google Maps does give me an option. And recently there was a mail that we had received from Google Maps where it helps you create an impact on the community that follows you by sharing photos of places that use recycled products, or suggesting some greener routes. So is that something that you as an organization is also looking at, so that we can measure our impact as a tourist and then sort of come back? Because what really happens that I have seen is we purchase different components from different vendors. So we don't know in the whole system as a tourist, how much of a contribution are we giving in terms of GHG, and how can we measure and lower our impact? Thank you so much.
I would like to go here. Thank you so much, Priyadarshini. And that's where the idea of destination resource monitoring becomes really integral. That, what are you contributing in terms of your income generation to the destination? What are you contributing in terms of, the impact you're creating in the destination? And that's where we as an organization have been developing a tool to be able to exactly measure the contribution of income in a destination, the amount of carbon emitted by tourists, the amount of water consumed in a destination, and when you're traveling, are you using a local guide or how you're using it? So that is the kind of destination impact monitoring which is already in development, and that's where that has to be implemented across destinations to be able to have better information on this front. So this has to kind of be initiated across destinations, and it becomes very integral to have that kind of data. So
I can probably add from what we are doing, right? From a booking.com perspective is it's still early days in terms of being able to connect the carbon footprint across every part of the travel journey. together. However, having said that, for us, one of the main objectives for us as an organization this year and next year is what we call as the connected trip, right? Which is, one is we are trying to remove friction in general from the travel process, right? Because if you think about it today, you might book your travel journey with different vendors, depending on the category, right? And sometimes, if one part of the trip, if something goes wrong, the rest of the trip starts to get impacted, right? And as a traveler, also you're dealing with multiple people that you yourself have to coordinate with. So one is removing friction, but then as part of that same journey, in terms of in terms of connecting different parts of the travel verticals together, whether it's the airline, whether it's cars, whether it is accommodation, whether it is experiences. What we are doing is, in every vertical, we are starting to track and measure this to some extent, right? So, like for example, in the aviation space, we are starting to actually put out the carbon emissions by flight. Okay, so you as a traveler can check that, and you can see how you can make a more responsible choice. You can also compare that with for example, if you're considering a car journey, right, over taking a plane, you have the option to choose a greener option, right? In an EV vehicle over a standardized car option, right? And then, of course, when it comes to accommodation, it is a little more evolved because we have the sustainable filter, and then you have the different grading of properties. You're able to see the exact actions that they are taking, etc., right? And then finally, the option is also in terms of attractions or experiences. There, what we are discovering is that people want access to more authentic, more sustainable experiences when they travel. But today the challenge is, where do you go to find those options, right? So what we are doing is, also we are working with our attraction partners to make sure that we are getting some of these options in either destinations which are more and more off the beaten track, or we are pushing experiences which are also more productive for the environment, right? So ultimately, it's about getting all of these parts of the journey together. It's a tough one, right? It's a long-term journey that we are undertaking to get there. But Priya, to your point, we have started undertaking some initial measures already in that regard.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we have one question to you, Santosh sir, from Dr. Aditi Chaudhary.
Sure.
Does Booking.com think they have the power to move from sustainability filter to making entire listing sustainable by default? We know niche or small can be beautiful, but big players like Booking.com can shape both demand and supply side. So, is this possible to remove sustainability filter and make entire listing sustainable? Maybe I'm too optimistic.
That would be the end goal, right? I think we want all accommodation providers to be sustainable, without doubt. And who knows, right? Maybe going forward, we might actually reach a point where we might start mandating accommodation providers have to achieve a certain level of sustainability, right? We would all love to get there. I'm afraid at this moment we are not there yet. I think, like I said, we started this journey about 18 months ago. I'm actually very, very happy to see the progress we've made just in 18 months, and I think, the next 18 months, I'm sure, are going to be even much more better. And I have to say that every time I talk to an accommodation partner, right, any part of the world, or even within India, any city, anywhere I go, it has started to come up more and more in conversations. Even as recent as maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, this was never a conversation, right? Sustainability was not, yes, it was a nice to have, but it was not part of the conversations we were having, right? But I think we've started to reach a point where now sustainability has become a core KPI for many organizations, right? And many people, today employees are graded on it, right? How sustainable are you? And we have actually set quite an ambitious goal for ourselves as a company globally. What we want to do is, we want to achieve by 2027, 50% of all the bookings that are made on our platform, 50%, 50% globally, across all categories, whether it is accommodation, aviation, cars, attractions. We want it to be on a through a sustainable provider. Okay, this is by 2027. So it's a bit ambitious, but we're all working to get there.
Thank you so much, sir. By this, we are closing our question and answer session. I request all the participants to kindly keep their camera on so that we can have a group picture together in remembering this webinar. Please keep your cameras on.
I think, Kartika, due to maintain the discipline, we haven't allowed everyone to open their camera. Oh, admin, if you can allow them right now so that they can open.
I thank all our speakers for sharing their insightful thoughts on this webinar. We hope to utilize all the suggestions in the implementation of strategies and measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the industry. On behalf of Ministry of Tourism, Government of India, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all our speakers and our participants for sparing their time for sustainable growth. And if you would like to participate in the upcoming webinar series, please reach out to us in our social media handles through Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. It is Sustainable Tourism India. See you all in another interesting episode. Till then, namaste. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.